This is it. Probably one of the, if not the most important part of this lecture series. Compound interest is such an important factor in everyone's life, and without us knowing it can quite literally make or break our financial situations. For many people it will be the gateway to wealth, and for others it will lose them everything. A caution before we get into this video: this part will contain a lot of mathematics. I will try to keep it nice and easy to follow, and I have already done all the working out for this section, so you don't have to be worried about having to do math for yourself. Imagine you have $100 that you want to invest at your local bank. It is a purely hypothetical bank, of course, but it does give you 10% interest rates yearly. This is an impressive amount, so you accept, and by the end of the year you have $110. Easy, right? But what would happen if you kept your money with this bank for the next year, with same conditions? This time you would end up, by the end of this second year, with $121 in your account, since this time 10% of 110 was given. This extra $1 may not sound too much, not very impressive, I agree, but if you consider the more realistic scenario, where you have an initial investment of $10,000 and you let it grow for 10 years, the end result would be a pretty impressive $25,937. With the linear growth model, where no compounding interest is calculated, you would only have 20,000. In other words, just by having compounded interest, you have earned yourself almost $6,000, which is a 60% increase on your income. Now let's take the same model, but this time you have another bank, which instead of your annual 10% interest, offers you 5% interest, but it pays it twice a year. Should you take this deal? Are you better off this way? In the case of the $100 example, with this new bank, after half a year you would get 5%, that's $5, so you would have $105 on your account, and by the end of the year you would get another 5%, but this time you would get the 5% of $105, leaving you with a net result of $110.50. In other words, by choosing this other bank, you have earned yourself 50 cents for your effort. In our more realistic scenario, with a $10,000 initial investment and a 10-year investment period, you would have $26,533 by the end of this 10-year session, which is 10% better than the previous case and over 65% better than just linear investment. From this, we can easily conclude that in general, compound interest is better in more frequent payments than in rarer but higher interest rates. If we consider Einstein's quote, the second sentence is what we must pay attention to. Compound interest can either work for us or work against us, and that's a really big difference, and there's a very big difference between the two. If you're someone who has their investment set up already developed and is well on its way to using it for themselves, I congratulate you, you're on the right path. But for most people, I would imagine that the other side of the sword is what they meet more often. The most obvious one of these negatives would be debt. The same way how 10,000 with the right bank grew to $26,000 in 10 years, it's very easy for a $10,000 debt to grow into $26,000 over the same 10 years. In actuality, it would probably grow at a much faster rate, especially if you make a mistake in paying it off. There's a very good reason why most financial advisors focus on getting rid of their clients' debt first. That's the most obvious form of investment, where you don't actually invest, you don't increase your wealth directly, But by getting rid of your debt, you basically earn the interest. And it's a surefire way because it's a very set amount, hopefully. And your payments will always reduce it at the exact same rate. Do not misunderstand, though. That does have its place in our life and it should never be shunned. Used correctly, it can be life-saving and extremely crucial to our lives. But used incorrectly, it can do a lot of damage. It's kind of like fire in that sense. Always be careful before taking up a loan, and make sure to always do the necessary calculations before you agree to it. I will have an entire video dedicated to that, so if you have any question on the topic, feel free to ask in the comments. I will read them and I will try to answer them in that video if I can. Or if you're watching at a later date, then just go and check out that video and hopefully I have already answered that question for you. The second way compound interest works against us is a lot more subtle. Through inflation, your money is basically evaporating as time passes on. It loses its buying power, so to speak. In the US currently it's at an annual rate of around 2%. It's manually capped there, or that's what the government attempts at least. Inflation is the main reason why most wealthy people keep most of their money in some kind of an asset instead of in cash. The only reason you would ever keep cash is if you do have plans to purchase something with it directly, maybe not today but relatively soon. If you expect an investment opportunity to occur for you, or maybe in a form of a savings, like just in case scenario. Otherwise, always be aware that cash is not a very safe way of saving money, and time is always against you. My next video will be fully dedicated to inflation, so I'll leave you hanging on this one as well. At the end, however, as someone who studies both math and physics, I would like to leave you with a few more realistic calculations of how compounding interest can really affect your life depending on what kind of financial habits you have. Let me paint a little bit of a picture. Let's say your annual income is around $36,000, which is around $5,000 a month. Obviously, this is actual cash, so you've already paid all of your taxes. I will be calculating with the exact numbers, like what you have. You have a mortgage that costs around $1,200 a month, a car loan for $200 a month. You pay utilities, which is like $150 on average, and food costs you around $350 every month. Travel costs, let's say $100 every month. Let's call it the Uber tax. This would make your necessary expenditure to be around $2,000, which would quite conveniently leave you with around $1,000 spending money every month. Now let's take 4 hypothetical people. Number 1 is a bit of a hedonist and spends everything he earns every single month. There is no need to waste too much time on this person, because in 10 years their situation will be about the same as he has right now. Their salary would grow to keep up with inflation, but so would the costs of living, so on average their financial situation would stagnate. Their net worth would also remain the same. That is, of course, if nothing unexpected happened, because they would quite literally have no savings to save their lives. So if, let's say, a virus started happening, glowing around the world, or they would get fired, you better hope you have a really good relationship with your friends and your family, because you will have no way of supporting yourself through those hard times. Person number 2, on the other hand, has decided to kind of use a divide and conquer strategy. They spend $500 on their normal extra life, like luxuries like going to restaurants or hanging out with friends, going to bars, and $500 they put into their savings account in case of emergency, and as a sort of a backup fund in case they ever in need of cash. If not for inflation, this person would have around $60,000 in savings by the end of the 10-year period, but adjusted for inflation, it would go down to closer to around $55,000. Although this person saved a pretty decent amount of money and has lived a bit harder of a life than the hedonist, but overall that extra money they managed to save is quite significant in case something unforeseen ever were to happen to him. Person number 3 would use the exact same strategy as person number 2, so $500 on luxuries, $500 in savings, but this time this person will use it, instead of just sitting in cash, he would invest this $500 every month. Will be really quite considerate and very lowball the numbers here, and let's say he earns 3% interest. That's very low for an investment. Most likely you will be able to do 6 to 8% if you know at all what you're doing. So you invest at 3% annual return. If this is how you invest, then that $500 every month over the 10-year period will turn your money into $70,000, even a bit more over the 10 years, which is more than $16,000 more than the previous person. It would be remiss to mention, though, that person number 2 would be in a safer situation in a sense, because if something bad happened, their wealth is entirely liquid, so it's very easy to access. In person number 3's case, it's a bit more tied up, depending on their method for investment, so getting their money might result in a bit of a loss. But still, that sacrifice might actually be worth it. For person number 4, we'll take the extreme case, the fire case, in case there are some of those in my audience. This person invests all $1,000 every month, spending nothing on non-essentials. Normally, they would have a bit more aggressive portfolio too, so with them let's use 6% as annual returns. This person's 10 years of basically abject poverty by themselves would net them a whopping $166,518. Not quite enough to retire yet, but quite a nice sum nevertheless. So here's the question. Which of these 4 people do you wish to model your life around? Or which are you right now? Each and every one of them has their own advantages and disadvantages. Number 1 will have the most freedom and have the best way to enjoy life to the fullest. However, in exchange, they will have 0 defenses. So if shit hits the fan, as they say, they are pretty much screwed. For number 2 and number 3, they have a pretty similar situation. Their strategies are basically identical. The only difference is that number 2 focuses more on the present because of the more liquid, easy to move around wealth, and number 3 focuses more towards the future. They will have a higher income, so much greater upward mobility than number 2, in exchange for a bit more stressful, let's say, problem management. Number 4 throws caution to the wind and basically sacrifices the present for the future. It's also a very viable solution. There is a bit of a gamble to it. So which one are you? Tell me down in the comments. You may actually be somewhere in between, and that's alright too. In the next video, as I have promised, I will be talking about inflation, why it exists, how it influences your life, how many ways it can interact with you on a daily basis. Until then, thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.